Hello, Daniel Yuck here. Thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate you. Today I want to share with you how I go about shading with a mag needle. Should you have any questions at all, I'm going to encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. I do have social medias under the same name as this YouTube channel. I have Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, all under Daniel Yuck. I would truly appreciate the support over there as well. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I am going to be bringing more videos like this for you all. With that being said, let's dive straight on into this. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using the Ambition Mars U tattoo machine on the 4-stroke setting. I'm going to be using a GMK 0015 round mag. I'm also using Reelskin fake skin along with Spirit stencil paper for my stencil. I will leave links for you to the gear that I am using in this video in the description below, so you can check it out on your end. I want to start from the very top, and I feel it's important to start with the ink. I want to talk about the ink a little bit. Now, for this demonstration, I am using straight black for this specific design and this specific tattoo. The reason why I am using straight black tattoo ink is because I want to focus on the technical aspect, so that way I could really see what I'm doing. And what that means is I'm using straight black because it's going to be easier to reach the darkest point, which is going to allow me to have fewer passes over the skin. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to practice my technical application, and I'm trying to get a layer of shading down as quickly as possible, but as cleanly as possible, using a specific technique that I'm going to share with you here in this video. One thing that I want to point out is if I was shading on human skin, I'm going to be using a pre-made gray wash set. I will definitely be using a gray wash to shade on human skin, and again, the only reason why I am using a straight black here on the fake skin is so that way I can focus on my technical application. I want to focus on the pressures, I want to focus on my motions and my consistency, my hand speed and voltage. All of these variables is the point of practicing with the straight black ink. If I'm applying too much pressure, it's going to show. If my hand speed and voltage is off, it's going to show. You get the idea behind that. So using straight black ink really allows me to focus on the technical aspect. The fundamental and rule of thumb here that I'm going to share with you in this video can be applied to any size needle and to any ink that we are using, whether it's straight black and or a gray wash. Now that we've talked a little bit about tattoo ink, by the way, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section down below. I want to talk more about the needles themselves. When it comes to shading with a mag, the same rule of thumb again applies to a straight mag, curved mag. It doesn't matter if it's a larger configuration or a smaller configuration. The same rule of thumbs will still translate on over. The size of the design that I'm going to be doing is going to determine the size mag that I choose. So if I'm going to be doing a design that's a little bit more smaller, that has tighter areas to work with, then I'm definitely going to go for a smaller needle count with my mag. Let's say if I'm going to be doing an area that's larger and that has a lot of open space and a lot of open areas that I need to shade, then typically I'm going to go with a larger mag to fill the areas quicker with fewer passes. When it comes to shading, I tend to run my voltage around the 5-volt range, 6-volt range. It really just depends on the machine specific. Some machines hit a little bit harder than others, so therefore that'll pretty much determine the final voltage. But typically when I'm shading with a mag, it's going to be anywhere from 5 to 6, 6.5. That's the voltage range that I feel comfortable with. I do like the way that it looks as well. Let me know in the comment section down below what voltage range you use to shade. I feel it's important to know why I like to stay on the lower end of the voltage range, and I like to stay lower on the voltage range when I'm shading because it gives me more time to work the skin with less trauma. So the higher that I'm running my voltage, the quicker I'm going to have to move working on the skin, which is not what I want, especially when I'm shading and when I'm trying to be real precise with different tones where I'm depositing ink in different gradients. I also feel it's important to note that there's not any set number of passes that we can do over any skin, really, even human skin. It all comes down to our technical application. Shading is essentially layering, and we want to layer these different shades in a manner where they transition and they have different gradients, and we put the shading in the right places. I look at shading like layers, whether I'm shading with a mag or a 3-round liner. I still look at it as layering. So each layer is a certain tone of gray, and then the next tone is going to be a little bit darker, and the next tone is going to be a little bit darker. You get the idea. In order to be able to layer over the skin and go over the skin kind of repeatedly, we're going to have that technical application align, and that's really what I want to talk about here in this video, and I kind of want to share that logic and thought process with you all. Knowing that I'm running at 5 volts, knowing that I'm using a 15 round mag, and then knowing that I'm also using the Ambition Mars U at the 4-stroke setting, typically we can set our machines at around 3.5. If we're really wanting to get smooth shading, then we can do around 2.5 of a stroke. However, you can see in this video, I'm still able to accomplish smooth shading with a 4-stroke. I feel what this says is that our technical application is very, very important. I've mentioned the term technical application a lot already throughout this video, so allow me to explain a little bit more on what I am speaking about when I talk about technical application. For me personally, when I look at technical application, I look at it as a combination of different things working together to create one result. Some elements that work together to create proper technical application is proper hand speed and voltage, is having a good understanding about needle depth, and it's also anticipation from our gear. Knowing what type of results that we're going to be getting from the gear that we are using is also very important. I feel once these elements are aligned, then we're able to approach tattooing with proper technique. So you're going to notice that I'm working off just the very, very tips of the needle, and this specific GMK Tattoo Needle does have 2 different rows, so I'm trying to line right here, for example, with just one of those rows. I don't need both, I don't need 2 lines, I just need a barrier so that way I know what I'm not going to go past, and that's what I created. As you see, it's nowhere near perfect, however, I now have that foundation to work off of. What I'm doing is I'm using the very, very tips of the needles, and I'm using these whip motions as you see in one direction. Sometimes there's a little bit of cross hatching going on as well, but for the most part I find the area and then I start working from where I want the darkest point on out, and I'm using whip motions. So in this instance I want the darkest point to be around this area of the petal, and you can see I'm using another cross hatching motion, and you can literally see these streaks of the needles in my application. That should tell us that I'm using a really, really light hand. I'm very, very lightly brushing on the surface of the skin. When I use this sort of technical approach with very light brush-like motions, I get more time over the skin. You can see that I'm even using this 15 round mag. I turn it over to the side just to use a few of the needles because I don't need the entire mag. That's okay to do as well, so feel free to artistically use the tools that are available to you at your discretion. If you need to turn the mag over and use just a corner, feel free to do that. I do that all the time. And again, the idea to shading is actually rather simple. It's layering. So we're going to want to layer using the very, very tips of our needles with light brush-like motions. Now we can go ahead and go back and forth with like pendulum motions if we want, if the surface area is big enough, or if that specific technique is needed. We can use whip motions as you see me using majority here in this video. I'll also use cross hatching as well to smooth things out. One of the biggest problems that I faced with the mag when I first started shading with the mag was my shading would come out looking blotchy. If you are getting blotchy like shading results, it may be because we're not having enough space in between the needle. So for example, I'm using a 15 round mag. You can see that all of the spaces that I am doing is around 15 needles thick. So I'm using those 15 needles. I'll go apply my shade, whip it out, then I'll move 15 points over and then apply it in the next part. So that is another variable that I pay attention to. The spacing in between each motion is what's important. The spacing in between each brush stroke is what's going to create that consistency and that smoothness. So if we have some of the points overlapping, then those areas that overlap are going to be a little bit darker, and this is how we start building up blotchy results. So when it comes to shading, not only does our hand speed and voltage have to be aligned for the right consistencies, textures, etc., but we also have to have the right needle depth. If we're going in too deep and too hard to begin with earlier on, then we're going to have less time to work the skin and we're going to cause more trauma earlier on, which is what we want to stay away from. On top of that, I always make sure that I'm very comfortable with the gear that I'm using to apply the shading. And another main variable that I'm considering is the spacing in between each layer. So you can see here is a new layer that I'm starting out here, and notice that the spacing between each needle is about 15 points thick. I don't overlap the layers because I don't want that blotchy look. By spacing out each individual brush motion correctly is going to give me that consistency that I'm looking for. You're also going to notice that I started going one direction with my motions, and then now I'm going in another direction. And I do this because I want to start smoothing things out, and I also want to start taking the darker point a little bit more out on the petal. For me personally, when I shade, I like to have textures within my shading. As long as everything comes out nice, clean, consistently smooth, I'm happy with my shading. The fundamentals that I'm talking about really do apply to every single stroke and motion that we're making when it comes to shading. And again, I can't really talk about this enough, that shading is layering. So let's say if we're layering and we're applying a little bit too much pressure, then chances of us causing trauma, swelling of the skin earlier on are great. But not only that, we're also making that area probably more saturated than we would have wanted. So I feel it's always better to just use the very tips of the needles and use brush like motions and build up on the skin. Keep in mind, there's no set number of how many passes that we can do before the skin is done and overworked. It's all going to come down to the technical application, how we use our needles. I also feel like having a plan when it comes to shading is everything, and that's what's really going to make that experience much more better. When we go into our tattoos planned out with the plan, we're able to be a lot more confident in the motions that we are making, in the strokes that we are doing. A good way to plan out a tattoo when it comes to shading is to figure out where you're going to put the darker areas and lighter areas before you start tattooing the client. Once we figure out where we want the darkest areas to be, and once we figure out the lighter areas, from that point forward, it's just about taking our time and applying the tattoo to the best of our technical ability. I'm always focused on this variable right here, so you're going to see that each streak that I'm inputting is lining up with one another. They're not really overlapping, and they may just a little bit, but however, my pressure is right to where I don't darken certain areas more than I'd want. I'm not getting that blotchy look because I'm also very mindful of the pressure. So I'm not only lining up the 15-point needle there with each one as I go, I'm also focused on the pressure. So again, once we start combining these variables, we're able to be more technically sound, technically correct. And you're going to notice that when I'm done, I'm getting clean, consistent results. Each line that we see right here is evenly spaced. It doesn't look blotchy, and that's just the first layer. I'm going to keep building from there. I want to raise awareness on the fact that I've gone over this area quite a few times. However, we're still at a very light point. That's because I'm using just the very tips of my needles, and I'm working with a low voltage, and I'm using brush-like motions to kind of build up these layers to the darkest point. Keep in mind, I'm using a specific technique to get the shading that I want. I want that textured sort of shading, as long as it has smooth, consistent shading gradients and transition going on. If we're wanting, let's say, a more of a realism type of shading, then I would definitely recommend using a gray wash and using lighter tones of a gray wash. And I would also recommend maybe taking up the voltage to around 6.5 volts, 7 volts, and moving a little bit faster to certain areas and see what type of results you get there. I don't recommend practicing on human skin, especially if we're not comfortable shading. I would recommend to practice on fake skin, use silicone limbs, use fake skin. I will leave links for you in the description below. Use fake skin until you become technically comfortable and you do become technically correct. I am also experimenting and trying new textures with shading, and I personally am a big fan of this sort of texture. You're going to see that I'm moving the round mag a little bit slower, so that way the streaks catch on the fake skin and I can layer these streaks to accomplish a shading. Let's say if you're wanting a type of shading that has less texture, I would recommend taking up the voltage to maybe around 6.5. You can use the same needle using a gray wash and start with lighter tones and then work your way up from there. This part right here demonstrates very well how important understanding our ink is. Not only that, it also demonstrates well how important needle depth and pressure is when it comes to shading. Here I'm applying a little bit of shading within the middle of this petal. However, I want some of the original skin tone to be showing up around the edge here, so I have to be real precise with where I'm placing the shading. Not only do I have to be precise, I have to be mindful of where I want the darkest and lightest points to be, because I still want my shading to have that clean transition from one lighter point to a darker point, or from one darker point to a lighter point. I still want it to have those clean transitions. You'll notice that I wiped away and I have a very light layer, and now I'm just simply repeating this process, and I'll cross hatch a little bit along the way. It kind of all fits naturally. When I'm doing this, these natural motions come to mind, and it's with every single design. Every single design has a specific flow, has a specific motion that we can make that'll best fit that specific spot for the design. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm just taking my time building up this rose right here as best as I can. Now, I feel like I've relayed a lot of my logic, my thought process, and my approach that I take when it comes to shading with a mag, so I'll go ahead and conclude the video there. However, if you have any questions at all, I'm going to highly encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. I will leave links for you in the description below to the gear that I'm using here in this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I am going to be bringing more videos like this for you all. I do have social medias under the same name as my YouTube channel. I have Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, all under Daniel Yuck. I would truly appreciate the support over there as well. If you enjoy my channel and find my content helpful, consider becoming a Patreon or sending over a super thanks, as I would greatly appreciate your support. I appreciate your time. Thank you for tuning in. You have a great day.